afternoon. I'm going to get my slides up. So I'm going to sort of back up a little bit, give you a little bit of a higher altitude view of what's going on in cities, and introduce you to this idea of biophilic cities. So one assignment for you today is to take that word biophilic. You have to use it in a conversation at some point. Maybe a couple of times today would be a good thing to do. So I'm a city planner, and these are both daunting and exciting times when we think about the challenges that cities are facing. How are cities going to adapt to climate change? How are we going to quickly transition to renewable energy? How are we going to take care of housing and sanitation and all the problems faced by cities? We think that we're going to have to imagine more sustainable places, and those places will have to be more compact and they'll have to be denser. But increasingly we recognize that we've also got to provide opportunities for nature, for experiencing nature in cities. So with this in mind, we started something called the Biophilic Cities project around this idea of biophilia. I have to give a lot of credit. There's a quote from Ed Wilson, E.O. Wilson at Harvard. He wasn't the first person to use the term biophilia, but he's really coined it in the way that we think of it now, which is this idea that we've co-evolved with nature, with the natural world. So not surprising that we are happier, healthier, able to lead more meaningful lives when we have nature around us. And it can't just be nature that we get on a holiday, on a summer vacation. It has to be all around us. It has to be daily nature or hourly nature, and it has to be integrated and designed into the neighborhoods and work spaces where we spend most of our time. So biophilia, this innate connection, this innate affiliation that we have for the natural world. Here's my second Wilson slide. The human species has grown up in nature. We're carrying with us our ancient brains, if you will. It's also an innate connection that needs to be fostered, though. This is an image actually from a film that we're making about cities and ocean. It's this idea of blue urbanism. We're the blue planet, and we're the urban planet, but we don't often connect the two realms. And we filmed in Miami at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Biscayne Nature Center, and we actually followed out into the ocean of a whole group of fifth graders, and we followed them. We had cameras, and the water was sort of up to their knees, and most of these kids had never been in the water before and had little exposure to that marine world, even though they didn't live that far away. And it was really amazing to see their reactions. So each pair of students got a net, and they were asked to sort of scoop the bottom of the area where we were walking in the water, and they were pulling up just remarkable things. And this image doesn't show it very well, but one student found what to me looked like an orange tennis ball, and it turned out to be a puffer fish. And when they put it in the water, we had these little floating buckets, and it deflated and became a fish again. And just the awe that the students reacted to, just the kind of amazement that I saw in their faces. So biophilia is innate, but it's like a muscle. We have to exercise it. We have to foster those connections. And that's a lot of what a biophilic city is, I believe. So in 2013, we actually launched this thing called the Biophilic Cities Network. The second task for you is to take a look at our webpage, biophilic.cities.org. We have a new logo. We have a lot of material online. We've been trying to tell the stories of various cities around the US and around the world. And we've been telling them in various ways, often through films and filmmaking, which is very effective. There is an online pledge, so you can actually join the Biophilic Cities Network either as an individual or a group just by signing a pledge. To be an official partner city requires a little bit more, and it requires, among other things, the identifying of a certain number of metrics that will track progress over time, and there has to be an official city council adopted resolution or proclamation stating the intention to become Biophilic City and to join the network. So we are gaining great traction, we think, right now. We have about 15 cities that have joined the network, and it's growing in number and in impact. Last summer, we had a couple of very high-profile cities. Washington, D.C. has now joined the network. These are images from Washington, and actually the image of Dean Sabine O'Hara, the dean of the College of Agriculture at UDC, not far from here. Every city in the network is doing interesting work and interesting projects, a little bit different conceptions of nature. These are images from their urban agriculture initiative, and actually Dean O'Hara has been helping to establish a series of urban food hubs in neighborhoods around Washington. And actually on the roof of her building, 18-inch growing spaces that produce a lot of food, so much food, in fact, that there's a CSA, community-supported agriculture, that operates out of the ground floor. So people are picking up weekly shares of food grown on the roof. So that's kind of one thing that Washington is doing. Edmonton, Canada, another high-profile city that joined last summer. A remarkable story of how this city is growing in ways that encourage ecological connectivity. Everything that happens, every road, every project that's built in this city has to ensure this ecological connection. And they've just finished building their 27th wildlife passage. So whenever they build anything, it's judged by the success of the movement of animals through the city. So a really remarkable story in that way. This is an image from a celebratory event in the Edmonton Public Library over the summer. We had 250 people talking about how this city was going to aspire to even greater biophilic aspirations or accomplishments. One of the interesting things about Edmonton, we commissioned a 5-minute film to tell the story of Edmonton, and we saw kind of early versions of this film, and our Edmonton partners were saying, well, all of the images in this film are sort of from summer, but yet Edmonton, half the year, is very snowy and cold. So the nature's a little bit different in those times of the year. And so the movie got revised, and you can find the movie. It's on our YouTube channel. It's a beautiful film, and it tells a little bit more the story of the winter city. So a biophilic city is a city that encourages its citizens to get outside and spend more time outside. So to that end, Edmonton actually has developed a winter strategy, and you're seeing some of the images here, including a set of winter design guidelines. How do we design the physical spaces of a city to shield from winter winds, to provide warming stations, to provide, in the case of the image on the lower right, this really interesting idea of a freezeway or an ice ribbon, so that maybe you could actually commute to work on ice skates in the winter, outside, connected to nature. So really remarkable things happening in that city. Pittsburgh has just joined our network this fall. Here are some ways that Pittsburgh already imagines itself to be a biophilic city. The rivers, the three rivers, very important forms of nature there. Their strategy in Pittsburgh is get as many people outside, putting in new trails and bike paths to get folks close to the river. There's even a water trail for kayaks and canoes. Forest canopy coverage, when you look down at the city, what percentage of that area is covered by forest, by trees? It's pretty high, 42%. And parks like the South Shore Waterfront Park that actually are designed to flood, so gets residents down close to the water, but also resilient in the face of things like flood events. So we've gotten a lot of support actually from Mayor Peduto, the mayor of Pittsburgh. Here he is receiving a Biophilic Cities certificate. They indicating they're officially joining the network, and we did this at the Phipps Conservatory in Pittsburgh. This is very much a global movement, so we're seeing cities interested around the world. These are images from Chengdu, China. We've gone there and had discussions, and hopefully they'll be joining our network. Already a pretty amazing story. What you see on the left is a an ecological ring, a network of wetlands and green spaces connected and encircling the center of that town, providing remarkable nature and remarkable recreation opportunities in that city of about 10 million. So the Biophilic Cities project and the Biophilic Cities network is doing many things to collect and tell the stories of what cities are doing. We've just issued an inaugural Biophilic Cities, inaugural issue of our Biophilic Cities journal. That's online. Would encourage everybody to look for that. I mentioned the films, and we've been making films about almost every city. One of them I'd recommend is our film about Singapore. It's a 45-minute film. You can find it entirely on YouTube. Just Google Singapore Biophilic City. Our emphasis is really low-budget films. We put cameras in front of folks, and we ask them to tell the story of their project or their neighborhood or their initiative. And this particular film, the Singapore film, has had 60,000 views. So it's not Taylor Swift, I know, it's not Beyonce, but it's pretty good for a low-budget film. And other cities are learning from what Singapore is doing. So what is a biophilic city? I think you can already tell some of the key dimensions. It's a natureful city. It is a city of abundant nature, biodiversity, of natural wildness. But increasingly, our cities are pushing the envelope. They're reimagining the very nature of a city. So I think we've gotten over this bifurcation that, in fact, a city, that nature and city are polar opposites. But I think we still have this notion that to visit nature in the city, to find nature in the city, you have to travel somewhere. You have to go down the street to the park or visit a forest. And so increasingly, our cities are reimagining themselves as parks or as gardens. So this is an image actually from Singapore, one of our partner cities. They have officially changed their motto from Singapore, a garden city, to Singapore, a city and a garden. And that sounds like a small change, but it's really quite a remarkable difference. So let's imagine cities as parks. Let's imagine cities as gardens and as forests. Other cities are doing it as well. Singapore is implementing this idea in lots of ways. They have a landscape replacement policy, so whenever they build anything in this city, they have to replace the nature taken at ground level with nature in the vertical realm. And buildings, remarkable buildings like this Park Royal Hotel, a new hotel, you can see how biophilic it is, adding to this sort of immersed in nature setting. So you have tree lines that are connecting with green rooftops, that are connecting with ground level gardens. About out of time, but I'm going to give you one or two more examples, and then I'm going to quickly go through some of the remaining slides just to give you a visual impression of what other cities are doing. Melbourne, Australia is also imagining this more immersive idea of nature. And so they've just completed actually a new forest plan that aspires to doubling their tree canopy coverage by 2040. Most importantly, though, their vision is not just planting more trees in the city. Their vision actually is of a city in a forest. Really quite important. You may have heard about some of their really creative community engagement techniques, and they have actually identified, they've given every tree in their city a unique number, and every tree its own unique email address. So that's pretty interesting. You can send a loving email to your favorite tree. Here's Biophilia. And in fact, the tree will return your email. It'll send you something back. Okay, so the idea of having nature around you and being able to move to progressively larger amounts of nature, rooftop or room to region or bioregion, and all the scales in between. We talk about a whole of city approach. We talk about this idea of a nature pyramid, like the food pyramid. What do we need for a healthy nature diet? And what constitutes the servings, the urban serving of nature that we need? And so this pyramid, like the food pyramid, suggests that we've got to think about the things at the base of that pyramid, the things around which will construct the bulk of our nature diet. So we can't build that diet by going off to visit that faraway place. The carbon footprint associated with that is going to be too great. So we've got to think about what is all that nature nearby, the local nature. Okay, Biophilic Cities also shared habitat. This is the story of the Mexican free-tailed bats, 1.5 million bats in Austin, Texas. Austin has just joined our network, a remarkable story of a city that's gone from biophobia about bats to celebrating the bats. There are even 2 or 3 bat-watching dinner cruises that go up and down the lower Colorado River, and during the summer when the bats emerge at night from the bridge. Wildness is important. This is Richmond, Virginia, remarkable story of how the James River Class 4 rapids is the central park, really, for this city. And they're doing all kinds of impressive things to connect folks to that watery environment. This is Gig Harbor, Washington, where they send volunteer divers underwater to send images to a pier, to screen on a pier. And they have this event called Pier Into the Night, making the invisible nature of cities more visible and more tangible. Remarkable stories and remarkably creative ideas. A program on the left in St. Louis. City of St. Louis has just joined our network, and that's the outgoing mayor, Francis Slay, who declared the goal of the city planting 250 butterfly gardens by a certain date. They've exceeded that goal. They've now reached 370, and it's an interesting metric for success of a city. Number of butterfly gardens, the possibility that you live in a neighborhood where you're going to see butterflies. On the right, a marvelous story from Wellington, New Zealand, where they have protected a wild area in the middle of that city with a predator-proof fence and allowing the native species of birds to repropagate. And their tagline is bringing birdsong back to Wellington. Birdsong. Everybody living in a city should be entitled to hear birdsong. What an interesting metric, an interesting way of judging the success of a city. That's a biophilic city, I would argue. Nature is in lots of forms and lots of ways. It's just an important point to say. It's shapes and forms and images of nature, and it's human design nature as well. We've gotten to know a Spanish designer who has designed this system for installing green roofs on the tops of buses. And a fellow named Mark Ranyan. And there are several cities in Spain where these buses are driving around. Vitoria-Gasteiz in the Basque Country, a green ring, Oslo forested areas, and urban stream restoration work in that city. I'm almost done. And Milwaukee, marvelous reuse of spaces, vacant lots. Singapore, again, a marvelous set of park connectors in that city. I really do need to stop. I promise I have 2 more slides. San Francisco, converting sidewalks to gardens and a new sidewalk landscaping permit. And I think this is, in fact, my last slide. My last point, and I think it builds on what Murray is saying, that we've got to begin to think about cities and the marine and aquatic environments around them. And so we're really seeing cities like Wellington begin to understand their nature as integrated land-sea. So Wellington is imagining blue belts to complement its network of green belts. So that's it. Thanks so much, and sorry to go a little long. Great.